All right, so I know there's some people still filing in, but I think we want to get started because we're running on a tight time schedule, and I'm sure everyone wants to get as much of this in as possible. So I want to thank you guys for coming. A few notes before we start. First, this is being recorded, so while the focus is going to be here on the podium, if you do ask a question, you know, it's going to get, the audio at least will be on the video. And those of you eating, please try to clean up after yourself, so there's a class coming in after we're done. So this event is being hosted by the HLS Forum. The Forum is a nonpartisan student organization at Harvard Law School dedicated to bringing open discussion of a broad range of legal, political, and social issues at the Harvard Law School. And it was founded after World War II by 30 returning soldiers as a memorial to their fellow students who died in the war, and ever since then it's been bringing speakers to campus that kind of promote and facilitate debate and hope that we can move to a more progressive society. Today we have two very distinguished speakers. I'm sure you know who both of them are, but just a short kind of rundown. Ralph Nader is a consumer advocate, lawyer, and author, and he received his AB from Princeton University and then received his law degree from Harvard University. He began as a lawyer in Hartford, Connecticut, and obviously has moved on from there and now speaks at colleges and universities across the United States. He is a consumer advocate and has founded many organizations, including the Center for Study of Responsive Law, the Public Interest Research Group, Center for Auto Safety, Public Citizen, Clean Water Action Project, and the Disability Rights Center. He will be speaking second. First on our list is Bruce Fein. He also graduated from Harvard Law School, and after serving as a federal clerk, he joined the U.S. DOJ, where he served as Assistant Director of the Office of Legal Policy, Legal Advisor to the Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust, and the Associate Deputy Attorney General. Mr. Fein was then appointed General Counsel of the FCC, followed by an appointment as Research Director to the Joint Congressional Committee on Covert Arms Sales to Iran. He recently served as the American Bar Association's Task Force on Presidential Signing Statements. Both will be speaking kind of in succession, and then we'll move to an open debate. And feel free to use, when you ask a question or make a comment, feel free to use the microphones in front of you. Everybody, Bruce Fein.
Well, thank you for the introduction. You're always reminded when you receive such effusions that none of it was said under oath. Right? It's a cautionary tale. As a preliminary, I think that there's a document being distributed asking for your email addresses, because we hope to send all of you a letter authored by Ralph and myself and Congressman Walter Jones to the Harvard Law Review, urging that they ask a former president of the Law Review named Barack Obama to come and encounter interrogation justifying the concentration of power in the presidency. And we would hope that once receiving this letter, you would not sit still until the Harvard Law Review responded adequately. After all, they're the intellectual beacon of the trajectory of the law that's come into such disrepute. Tacitus chronicled thousands of years ago as the Roman Republic degenerated into the Roman Empire. The worst crimes were dared by few, willed by more, and tolerated by all. And we confront at present, I submit, a constitutional crisis that is being tolerated by all. And I want to recount seriatim in the way that our founding fathers indicted King George III in the Declaration of Independence, the constitutional violations that have reduced us to vassalage to an omnipotent president. All our rights are at his indulgence. And let's begin at the top. The president claims authority to assassinate any American citizen. Secret facts, secret law, no post-mortem proving any culpability, without accusation, charge, or whatever. Not only has he claimed the power, he's exercised it. First with Mr. al-Awlaki in Yemen, who was never charged with a crime whatsoever. And I should recognize Tony Schaefer would be here, my colleague who served in Defense Intelligence Agency and Army Intelligence and was in Afghanistan. that there was no effort to try to capture him that could have been done before using lethal force. There was another U.S. citizen who was, quote, collateral damage. And then a few days thereafter, a 16-year-old son of Mr. Alaki was vaporized by a Predator drone. No notice, no due process. He became an unperson, in the words of George Orwell's 1984, right? An unperson. Disappeared. You never heard of the 16-year-old again. Not discussed. Now, what does this mean? Even someone who is as non-squeamish as Michael Hayden, former director of the CIA and National Security Agency, who was there when the terrorist surveillance program unfolded, violating FISA, has said, what are we as a country? We needed a warrant to intercept his emails and phone calls, but we could kill him with no due process. Even he found it shocking. And he noted there are only two countries in the world that believe these Predator drones are legal, Israel and the United States. That's number one. And think how revolutionary this idea is, given our principles as a republic. Remember the first words of the Declaration of Independence. We have unalienable rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness because we're born. We don't have to argue why. They're ours because we're human. And that governments are instituted to secure those rights. Now we're in a situation, governments are instituted to destroy them. This is truly shocking. Now, you may say, it's not going to use those Predator drones against me. I'm not an Arab. I'm not a Muslim. I'll think about that tomorrow. But that's not what civilized people do. We honor due process because what it says about us. We are every bit as much citizens of the United States responsible for what our government does as those who lived in the Third Reich were responsible for Adolf Hitler. You can't play spectator. And this is not evidence that you need to do archaeological expeditions to discover. It's open and notorious. And it's up to us to insist upon accountability. That's just the first. Now, a close second is the president's usurpation of the war power, specifically entrusted to the Congress of the United States, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11. And it wasn't there for academic purposes. The Founding Fathers surveyed the history of warfare, and they identified the executive as the chief culprit in magnifying danger manyfold to justify war because that's how the executive aggrandized power, right? As Cicero said, in times of war, the law is silent. Times of war, the president gets the secrecy, the taxes, the appointments, the glory, the laceration of due process, no one questions them. So, there was no dissent from the Founding Fathers, even from Alexander Hamilton, who was in favor of a very muscular presidency, that only the Congress could authorize war. It couldn't even be authorized by a treaty ratified by the Senate. Indeed, one of the reasons why the League of Nations was voted down was because Woodrow Wilson at that time was insisting that a treaty establishing the League of Nations could authorize war even if Congress did not. So that's why the Founding Fathers insisted on this authority being entrusted and fastened on the Congress. President Obama in Libya, did he consult Congress? No, he didn't get any authorization. He didn't even have any money to fight the war. The monies that he spent were appropriated for counterterrorism purposes. Now, unfortunately, because the Pentagon is not audited, the only institution in government that is not, other than the Federal Reserve, which, again, steals from the poor to give to the rich. Right? The president could use $2 to $3 trillion floating around in the bowels of the Pentagon to spend. Again, another violation of the Constitution, which specifically states, uniquely with regard to military spending, Congress can't authorize any funds beyond 2 years. To force the Congress to come back and revisit, do we need the standing army? Do we need this money? If you can't even find $2 to $3 trillion, how do you know when it was even appropriated? So in Libya, the president said, I have the unilateral right to initiate warfare. anytime I want. Regional stability, the credibility of the UN Security Council, national interest or otherwise. And that's why in today's debate over whether we should initiate war with Iran if it has a nuclear capability, it's assumed the president makes that decision, not Congress. The president makes that decision, not Congress. How does that come to be? And it's not that the president doesn't really know what the law is, because when he was running for office in 2008, he said, only the Congress can authorize bombing of Iran. His vice president, Joe Biden, said it would be an impeachable offense if George Bush bombed Iran without congressional authority. And he said he had consulted all the smart professors at Harvard Law School who told him that. He was in vice president, silence. Hillary Clinton made the same echo about omnipotent congressional authority over war running for president in 2008. Now she's the champion of the opposite principle. The opposite principle. So these are not questions where you have strong legal arguments one way or the other. You have pure power and might. You know, the thrill of domination for the sake of domination against the principle of the rule of law, of modesty and restraint. And it's up to us to make sure that the rule of law and restraint wins, because it's not winning now. I drafted an article of impeachment against Obama after the usurpation of the war power. It sits there. And part of this is not just the president. Congress has acquiesced in this. They were angry, literally angry, when they were told you actually need at least to delegate to the president the authority to invade Iraq. Said, no, we don't want to vote on the bill. We like to be an invertebrate. No? Such an easy, comfortable life. Don't hold us responsible for anything. Said, well, why are you elected then? You have one oath, to support and defend the Constitution, not be a spectator as it's lacerated, defiled, vandalized daily. Those are the most egregious constitutional violations that without more would justify impeachment and removal from office. Remember Article 2, Section 4. The President and other officers of the United States shall be subject to impeachment and removal for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors, which was defined at the Constitutional Convention to mean attempts to subvert the Constitution. It's not ambiguous. If these don't qualify as impeachable offenses, there's nothing that a president can do that would justify his removal, including flouting any decisions of the Supreme Court, as Newt Gingrich's promises that he would bring us, you know, with his great brilliance and insight into the Constitution. So this is a way in which, in some sense, the Constitution is being eroded by non-enforcement. I'd say the impeachment clause was there as the ultimate check on the president. When Nancy Pelosi in 2006 said impeachment's off the table, it emboldened Bush and Cheney. Nothing that they could do. Waterboarding, violating the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, nothing would cause Congress to respond. And they were right. Then we can go, the third chief indictment against the president is the failure to faithfully execute the laws. Now we can go back and search for its origins. In the British Bill of Rights of 1688, the King James II would not enforce the recusancy laws. He would pick and choose among his political favorites which laws to enforce and which not for political purposes. And so the Bill of Rights of 1688 said, no, the king cannot decline to enforce a law. Only the parliament can give a dispensation, by pardon or otherwise. That then later was enshrined in Article 2, which made it obligatory on the president to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Now, I know about that very well because I participated in part in drafting impeachment articles against Richard Nixon. And he was indicted in part for not taking care that the laws against obstruction of justice after Watergate were faithfully executed. Indeed, he participated in the corruption, right? The tapes, the bribes, payments, etc. Now, take President Obama. He announces directly and through his Attorney General, waterboarding is torture under our laws, which is made a crime. And it was a bipartisan statute that made torture a crime. Bipartisan vote that made the United States a signatory to the Convention Against Torture. And we, in fact, prosecuted Japanese soldiers for actions during World War II that constituted torture via waterboarding. Indeed, under the Reagan administration, there were police who were prosecuted for torture, for interrogations that they're equivalent of waterboarding. So we have the president saying, waterboarding is torture. His attorney general said, waterboarding is torture before the Senate Judiciary Committee. We have Bush and Cheney saying, we did waterboarding, and we're proud of it, and we would do it again. Right? No blushing at all. So you don't need to do any investigation. You have the confessions. Waterboarding, it's a crime. You can pardon someone, like Gerald Ford pardoned Nixon, but at least the recipient of the pardon has to accept it and acknowledge what was done was wrong. But you don't have an option, if you're entrusted with faithfully executing the law, to say, oh, let's just be forward-looking. I really don't want to deal with that. Could make trouble with the Republicans. I might not get my legislation through. So for political purposes, I don't want to enforce the law. That's not a constitutional option. And moreover, someone who had attended Harvard Law School, even when I was here my first year, and I was quite unschooled about anything. At that time, you don't really know anything when you're 21 years old. I could understand that if all the law was forward-looking, there would be no criminal prosecutions, right? The law always looks at what people have done. We don't convict them for things that might happen in the future. Now, that's called bills of attainder. And we have the president of the Harvard Law Review saying, oh, we just are going to be forward-looking in our law enforcement approach, and therefore Bush Cheney, the destructions of the video interrogation tapes, the obstruction of justice, we don't want to prosecute those cases. Flagrant violation of the duty to faithfully execute the laws. Indeed, isn't it the United States that characteristically has lectured other countries on no, you can't have the law reduced to politics with ulterior motives? Because what we described, China under Mao and the Soviets under Khrushchev or Brezhnev or Stalin, we assail them for having politics infect the prosecution of such egregious offenses. Things have gotten so obtuse here, and I know it's a little bit of a deviation or detour from the recitation here about the United States leading the world in upholding the rule of law, that when we were prepared to transfer our detainees in Afghanistan, held at Bagram, to the Afghanis, we said, can't do it, because you don't have any laws that permit detention without accusation or charge, like we do. Well, you don't have an enemy combatant law like ours. You got to go change it. You have to reduce your rule of law so we can make certain that none of these detainees go free. Then we have the president's endorsement of the idea of enemy combatants that can be detained for life at Guantanamo Bay or elsewhere without accusation or charge, on the idea, if we want to borrow from our infamous John Yoo, the person might be linked, how many areas removed, to some terrorist offense. Now, linkage right now is not a crime. I don't know whether it's ever been a crime. Mr. Hughes never defined what linkage was, but that's how he decided that Mr. Alaki could be killed, because he was linked. Somebody may have listened to his lecture and may have done something bad, and therefore that made him criminally culpable, not under the law, but in fevered imaginations, and that's good enough, Law enforcement's like horseshoes. Leaners is good, even if it's, capital punishment that follows. So what we have a system now, aggravated by the National Defense Authorization Act, where the president can have the military show up on your doorstep tomorrow and say, you're going to Guantanamo, because I think, based on facts only I know of, that you are substantially aiding a coalition partner in some act of hostility, which at some time in some way might affect the national security of the United States. And when you're 85 years old, then maybe my successor will give you an opportunity to exonerate yourself. But until that time, you can rot in hell. That's the authority that's granted under the National Defense Authorization Act. And the president signed it. But he said, I'm only going to use it against the really bad people. Now, and I have a really good magnetometer, and I place it against the person who I'm going to detain, and that gives me a signal. You know, like the trial by ordeal, the witches who are really evil, they sink, and then the innocent ones come to the top. That's we are living under a national security state. All our rights are at the indulgence of the president. Now you can say, but it's not going to happen to me. You know, like many said in World War II when the Japanese Americans got into concentration camps, it wasn't going to happen to me, so who cared? Even the ACLU didn't defend that act of racism. But even if you don't care about the current generation, and it can happen to you, because we can go back to the echoes of the Third Reich, and so that the Germans said initially, I'm not a Jew, I'm not a trade unionist, I'm not a Catholic, and then they came for them. But what about those yet to be born? It would be scandalous. It would be an odium would be visited on the contemporary generation that, well, if the Constitution doesn't collapse on me, posterity can inherit it when it gets really bad. Just think where we would be if that was the attitude of our ancestors at Valley Forge, Cemetery Ridge, Omaha Beach. We'd inherit no freedom. We couldn't even be in this classroom without being spied upon, thrown into prison or whatever. So we have that obligation, because we inherited so much, because so many sacrificed before, to stand up and say, enough, I have to fight for those who can't protect themselves now. That's what it means to be an American. That's the definition of what America was about. We care about rule of law and due process because what it says about us. It's not concessions to the accused. Now, I'm running out of time, and I need to yield to a more fabulous successor here. But I want to underscore, in my judgment, that it is not an option in a democracy to be a spectator to politics, because it's a collective endeavor. We, the people, are still sovereign, and we control our destiny. And that means that we have a moral obligation to use our eyes and ears to check government abuses, because even if it doesn't affect you, it can affect your neighbor. We all hang together, or we all hang separately. And I would suggest that you, here in this room, should harass your member of Congress, the Senate, or the President every day until the National Defense Authorization Act is repealed. And if you have to do it 5 times a day, it needs to be 5 times a day. And before I conclude, to show you how inane this bill was, there wasn't a single citizen in the entire United States who demanded it. No one wrote into a member of Congress. There were no marches in the streets saying, well, we need the president to have this authority to arrest us because we feel so unsafe. Nothing. It was a brainchild of 2 senators, Lindsey Graham, South Carolina, and John McCain, whose entire existence is refighting the Vietnam War and playing Robert Jordan and For Whom the Bells Toll. There were no congressional hearings, none. There were no findings that there were any shortcomings in the existing powers of the president to protect the American people, but it passed anyway. And Lindsey Graham, senator who was pledged to uphold the Constitution, said on the floor of the Senate before the vote, well, under this bill, if a detainee says he wants to see a lawyer, we say, shut up, you don't have a right to a lawyer. It says what this bill does, it takes the battlefield here to the United States. So what we used to do with Predator drones in Pakistan and Afghanistan, we can do right here. And he said it with a sense of triumphalism. This is mini Julius Caesar. I came, I saw, I conquered. These are the kind of political, moral midgets we have who are ruling the country. And we need to end it, and we can. A majority is one man or woman with courage. That's why I'm handing this over to Ralph Nader. But I can't imagine somebody more equipped to have this courage. Just sit down.
Thank you very much, Bruce. He could have gone in much greater detail, technical and otherwise, but we are time bound and we want to have some interaction with you. First of all, I want to just pay tribute to two people here who are upholding a tradition that is not availing itself of sufficient volunteers. And that's Mr. Roberts, who's, I understand, about the only volunteer keeping the Harvard Law School Forum going, which is a great institution here. And Lisa Ma, who I understand is the main volunteer keeping the Harvard Law Record going. And any of you who want to add your volunteer help and join with them to expand these two institutions that deal with the law writ large, deal with the big policy questions. They don't deal with the technical issues of X10b5. They deal with the major issues, jurisprudential, constitutional, political issues that will affect you and that will challenge your leadership in the future. And any of you who are interested in volunteering, I'm sure they will open the door wide for you. Second, is there anybody from the faculty here? Okay. Third, are there any notables in the administrative hierarchy of the Harvard Law School here who keep the institution going? Okay. How many here are 1L, please? How many are 2L? How many are 3L? Precisely as predicted. That's what the law school does to you. You come in idealistic. You actually think the law has some connection with the word justice, which Senator Daniel Webster once called the great work of human beings on earth. And by the time you're finished, if you're not exhausted, you're heading into mostly these corporate law firms who are the power brokers for a great deal of the criminality and the Wall Street shenanigans that have been going on. They are the brilliant geniuses of facilitating the subjugation of the law by raw corporate power, all in the name of the law. Now, we are members of a profession that have historically continued to lie to ourselves. Most professions lie to themselves. A lot of doctors don't think there's much malpractice, for example. And lying to ourselves estranges ourselves from reality. So we live in illusion. We live in illusion that was expressed in September when John Brennan came here. How many of you were in the room when John Brennan was there? See, very few. And he arrived here, and he gave a speech. Now, John Brennan is the assistant to President Barack Obama for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism. And he gave a speech entitled, "Strengthening Our Security by Adhering to Our Values and Laws," end quote. And he dared to come to the Harvard Law School and present a rendition of very nice sounding values, which were almost entirely fictional in terms of what the White House has been doing. Just the opposite. And Harvard Law School didn't lay a glove on him. And he got away with it. And he got away with it because his audience was fawning, largely fawning over him. It was not this audience. If you want to read it, it's online, and you will see that he makes a remarkable series of statements. First, our highest priority, Mr. Brennan said, is and will always be the safety and security of the American people. As President Obama has said, we have no greater responsibility as a government. Who defines security and safety? Those who cause most of its transgressions. The styles of violence that are described in our country and given highest priority are those that are not responsible to corporate power. They are not traced to corporate power. And so, while 3,000 people were massacred on 9/11, which generated a massive counterterrorism business with trillions of dollars in war and armaments and domestic security activities and jobs and consultings and think tanks and equipment. And it was all to keep America safe. Here's what was going on. Every year, 45,000 people dead every year, according to Harvard Medical School researchers, because they don't have health insurance, they can't afford it, to get diagnosed and treated. Every year, 58,000 Americans die from workplace-related diseases, according to OSHA, and trauma. Every year, 65,000 Americans die, according to the EPA, from preventable pollution. Every year, 100,000 Americans die every year due to hospital malpractice, not counting emergency rooms. Harvard School of Public Health study. In other words, there are well over 300,000 Americans who die from preventable causes and certainly should reside under the definition of national security that aren't even part of a single dialogue in any political campaigns of the major parties. They are not the preoccupation of Barack Obama, who has spent more time figuring out how to kill a suspected terrorist overseas in his briefings every morning than he has spent on all of these preventable American deaths, including far larger numbers of sick and injured people who are directly under his authority and responsibility to do something about it. And yet, right after 9/11, the world was on our side. Even our adversaries sent statements of commiseration. And instead of pursuing the backers, the attackers, as a police criminal action, we decided to blow apart two countries and attack other countries, Afghanistan and Iraq, one of the greatest war crimes in American history. And in so doing, we began to immolate our own constitutional rights. Obama said a few days ago in the State of the Union that for the first time in 20 years, Osama bin Laden will not present a threat to the United States. His job was finished a long time ago. He put into motion forces fortified by greed, power, profit, sense of domination, where we're doing it to ourselves. Think of the huge diversions of public budgets to the military and to the so-called war on terrorism that could have been used for child health care, for the renovation of public works, for the protection of the environment, for the advancement of decent education, for the abolition of poverty. We're doing it to ourselves. His work is done. We are two major terrorist strikes away from a police state, the likes of which you will never be able to imagine. Look what one terrorist strike did to us, and we began doing it to ourselves. The problem with law students today is they don't have a high enough estimate of their own significance. Yes, they're often viewed in the literature as confident and boastful a little bit about their intellect and very aggressive and very self-motivated. But what they don't understand is that they're preparing themselves to be spokes in gigantic corporate and governmental wheels. Spokes, well paid. What they don't understand about themselves is their own power, which I'll get to in a moment. The American Bar Association in 2005-2006, led by Michael Greco, who's a corporate lawyer downtown in Boston, issued 3 white papers, one of which Bruce worked on, claiming that the president then, George W. Bush, was engaging in unconstitutional behavior. Not an episode, not a single event, systemic unconstitutional behavior. Illegal surveillance, violation of the FISA Act, that's a 5-year jail term. Each clearly an impeachable offense. Systemic signing statements, they thought was an unconstitutional pattern of behavior. He engaged in more signing statements than all the presidents, I think, put together before him. Now, when the ABA, which is the largest bar association in the world, known for its conservatism, can present the President of the United States with 3 white papers claiming that he's been engaging in consistent unconstitutional behavior and not get a single courtesy letter back acknowledging receipt, never mind interacting through the Office of Special Counsel or the Attorney General, you can see that what has happened in the last 10 years is an institutionalization of constitutional criminality, from the violation of the congressional power to declare war, to federal statutes, to international treaties, to Geneva Convention, to national sovereignties abroad. Those 3 reports hardly made a ripple on law schools. We have over 180 law schools in the country. What are they there for? When I was a law student, 1L, we sat in the courtroom there, which we would be there for the speech, but I understand there's a commercial bar cram course that has taken a residence there. By the way, don't ever pick your courses based on your bar exam fears. The bar exam is eminently crammable in more ways than one. So, don't say I'm not going to take jurisprudence because of the bar course. So the issue was Robert Hutchins. You may have read, how many of you read the article in the Record that I just wrote on the website? Just wrote, it just came out 2 days ago. See what I mean by online? It's nothing like print. For the first time in 70 years, the Harvard Law Record's not come out in print. The Harvard Law Record launched me. It launched the motor vehicle safety. It launched so many careers in public interest law. And it just is being ignored. Now, Hutchins, as you know, I don't know, maybe you don't know, he was dean of Yale Law School at age 29. He was president of the University of Chicago. He came to Harvard to speak to us. And he asked the question, what is the purpose of the Harvard Law School? Everybody sort of snickered and laughed, you know. What the heck kind of question is that? Doesn't he know that the Harvard Law School only has 2 purposes? It's to establish a very smart faculty, the best and the brightest. If you don't believe it, all you have to do is ask them. and to matriculate a very motivated student body. It doesn't have a collective voice. Didn't he understand that? Well, he was dean of Yale Law School, no wonder. He was dismissed. We now have a president, and his predecessor the same, who has arrogated to himself the role of prosecutor, judge, jury, and executioner. That is something that might diminish whatever trivial occupations. By comparison, are involving the faculty and the law students of America. The rationalization of illegality is endless. If there was a dictionary of antonyms to the word infinity, one of the examples would be the ability of members of the legal profession to rationalize illegality from A to Z. The rationalization of illegality sometimes is abrupt and sporadic and challengeable. Joe McCarthy. But when the rationalization of illegality, when the allowance of the corporate state and the military-industrial complex, the former was warned by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The corporate state called it fascism, 1938, in a dispatch to Congress. And the latter was warned by President Eisenhower in no uncertain terms, the military-industrial complex. When it goes on year after year, it becomes institutionalized. And when criminality becomes so institutionalized, it hardly is a subject for topics by law reviews. That's the way things are. Secret law, secret evidence, no charges, imprisonment without charges, without lawyers, indefinite. This is America? You know, this has to be dealt with instrumentally. We are banking revenge overseas. Before the 13th drone strike killed a suspected Pakistani terrorist a few months ago. A dozen drone strikes killed over 200 people, innocent, in search of him. The banking of revenge sometimes takes a long time to exhibit itself. After all, we supported vicious dictatorships in those areas of the world, repressing their people with our military arms, our diplomatic cover, our vetoes in the UN. And it took a long time for them to say, we're going to strike the U.S. at its homeland. Banking revenge, you will see in your lifetime. And if it isn't physical armaments, it will be biological and chemical. Our country is so vulnerable, it could go down as the most vulnerable country in the world. Subways, pipelines, dams, laboratories, waste deposit sites, radioactive material. We're sitting ducks. The great mistake the public made was that after 9/11, when it was clear that this criminal gang did not have a second strike capability, that's when the war on terrorism was created. And when President Bush said there are al-Qaeda cells, sleeper cells all over the country, they're well funded, they hate us, they're suicidal. Why didn't they strike? We were defenseless, as we are defenseless to any suicidal attack. Because they weren't there. And see, we took a criminal gang and turned it into a major war, and an announcement that we would go anywhere, into any country, unilaterally, and wreak our violent will without observing our own Constitution and statutes. Now I'm going to end by just reading the list of violations that have occurred as a result of 9/11. You can have copies of this. It was put together by a great law professor who's too good to teach at Harvard, Professor Jonathan Turley at GW Law School. Don't ever think law professors that don't work Harvard are relatively inferior. We grew up that way here. They weren't Harvard law professors. They just didn't make it. They didn't quite have it. Professor Jonathan Turley, also a litigator, great defender of the aggrieved, said, in the decades since September 11, 2001, this country has comprehensively reduced civil liberties in the name of expanded security state. They form a mosaic of powers under which our country could be considered, at least in part, authoritarian. And this will take 1 minute. And here are his 10 losses of freedom directly attributed to the reaction of our government and its supporters after 9/11. Assassination of U.S. citizens. You heard that from Bruce Fein. Indefinite detention. 3, arbitrary justice. The president now decides whether a person will receive a trial in the federal courts or in a military tribunal, a system that has been ridiculed around the world for lacking basic due process protections. 4th, warrantless searches. 5, secret evidence. 6, war crimes. And that, of course, involves such things as immunizing CIA employees from being investigated or prosecuted for such actions. Secret courts. immunity from judicial review, that's spreading, continual monitoring of citizens, and 10 extraordinary renditions, which belies President Obama's statement that his administration will no longer torture. It's just subcontracted, that's all. Those are the 10. You can come up and get them if you'd like. Let me end with a brief sermon about law students. The trouble with you is you're behaving as if Harvard Law School is a trade school. High-priced, highfalutin. The difference between a profession and a trade is a profession is ministered to prevent exactly the problem that it is skilled to treat for a retainer. So doctors should be preventing disease and trauma, even though they make money when they have to deal with them. Lawyers should be preventing conflict. We had a great opportunity after 9/11 to wage peace together with a police action enforcement, to wage peace. But the powers that be who realize this have not stepped forward with the requisite moral courage. After the drum beats to the war in Iraq, where 1 million Iraqis have died at least, we don't even count them anymore. 300 former retired military officers with generals and admirals, and Admiral Shanahan, General Zinni, 300 military officers retired, diplomatic officials retired, and national security retired, spoke out publicly against the invasion of Iraq. The people who could have supported them into a major infrastructure and quadrupled their number in a month to stop this invasion, and that included George Soros, who wrote and spoke against the Iraq War, didn't have the imagination to put a couple $100 million of media and staff behind that in the months before the invasion of Iraq, which could have exposed the lies and the cover-ups and the falsifications of Dick Cheney and George W. Bush, permitted by a compliant media and an ink blot Congress. Could have stopped it in its tracks. A couple $100 million. He makes that in a month. Our leaders to be are you. And you've got to have a higher estimate of your role. Someone once asked me, how many women were in your class, Mr. Nader? 13. How many blacks? Maybe 2. How many Hispanics? Maybe 1. At Harvard, most of the Hispanics were children of Latin American dictators and oligarchs. And so your predecessors fought against the war in Vietnam. They fought for civil rights, sometimes being beaten up and imprisoned in the South. They fought and made the environment a major issue with Earth Day, 1970. They fought to give you not just diversity, but to give you diversity with a purpose. What's the purpose of the diversity? Other than career gratification. When Mr. Obama was running for president, and I criticized him, and people said, how can you criticize me? You're the first black American. I said, I just want to make sure, I want to try to make sure that it's not just an upwardly mobile career move. It's got to mean something. You speak with moral authority to working lawyers and faculty and judges. You may not know that. But when in the past law students have put out petitions and proclamations, the rest of the profession knew that those were heartfelt expressions of idealism. They knew that the law students did not have a commercial retainer to motivate them. They knew that the law students did not have an axe to grind. And that's why they knew the law students had moral authority. And you can communicate with tens of thousands of law students over the internet, free, which we couldn't back then. And you can mount a movement to restore constitutional practices and the greatest idea of Western civilization, which is due process. Go for it. Thank you.
Is that clear? Excellent.
Yes, just ask. Yeah. We should stand up.
Yeah.
So we have a few minutes left, so I guess if you want to raise your hand, and Bruce or Ralph will kind of point you out, and you can just use the mics in front of you. There's a button in front of it, and go for it.
This gentleman here. Yes.
Hi, my name is John Niles. I Harvard 60 and then the University of Da Nang as graduate school. And I also, in that process, swore an oath to the God of my understanding to uphold, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. My question to you, gentlemen, is I'm a member of the Smedley D. Butler chapter of Veterans for Peace, the Marine general that was basically written out of history because he told it like it was. But I have it on my back. If war is a racket, which I know it is for a fact, then logically, the government that sends them on these rackets has to be a criminal enterprise. My question is, how can we expect a criminal enterprise to police itself?
Well, the first thing you do is you make sure that no one is elected to Congress who won't insist on impeaching a president who usurps the right of Congress to decide. I could guarantee you, I'd wager my entire estate, if the Congress of the United States was told, you have to decide today whether our troops stay in Afghanistan, they wouldn't vote for it. They wouldn't vote for them being in Iraq or any place else. And the only way you're going to restrain a president is the Congress says, you do that, you will be impeached and removed. And it was quite telling being involved in the Nixon impeachment, even though the articles were only voted on by the Judiciary Committee and resigned before it went to the full House and then a trial in the Senate, that the deterrent effect of that example was still resonant in the Reagan administration. Hey, that would be impeachables. Now, it's a joke. No one even, you think of impeachment as like it's an assassinated coup d'etat. We can't even think of that. Yeah? In fact, it was Ben Franklin at the Constitutional Convention said impeachment is a surrogate for assassinations. It's the way in which you do things legally when you no longer can trust an executive branch to honor his oath of office. And that's up to you to make certain you run for office and you write your congressman every single day. You have to decide whether our troops are in Afghanistan. You have to decide whether our troops are going to Iraq. You can't delegate and give it away. And if you do, you're out of office. That is the only way those members will pay attention to a voice. They don't read anymore. They can't comprehend much of anything. But they're one thing they're preoccupied with, staying in office. And even with all of the power of Wall Street supporting the TARP bailout, I was in the House of Representatives the first vote on TARP that went down. And the reason why they rejected all of the lobbyists at the time, I could see emails, faxes, phone calls, tens, thousands every hour came in. Members got frightened and said, well, if I have to choose between my re-election and Lockheed or Citibank, I need to stay in office. And then when it stopped, then they went back and fell into the hands of the lobbyists. Now, I know it seems probably to the audience, well, this is just fairy tale. One citizen can't make a difference. But one citizen can make a difference if it's persistent and it sets in motion the kind of collaborative effort that democracies thrive on. When Rosa Parks went to the back of the bus, you think she said, tomorrow we'll have a desegregated society, this is great? No.
What's the front of the bus?
Refused to go to the front of the back of the bus.
Okay.
But anyway, that is what's needed in order to prevent the criminal enterprise from ever being launched.
Yes?
For Mr. Nader, do you have any in mind any strategies that people could use, given that there is so much concentrated power that happens to be entrenched, and it seems as though if we're relying on things like democratic agency, a lot of us have in the back of our mind that most people don't care. So maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but is there any specific strategic?
Well, first of all, 1% of the people who care can turn around the country if they reflect what Abraham Lincoln called the public sentiment. So you don't have to have tens of millions of people. Second, Bruce is right. Congress really is the pivot. It's the one organization that has the most power under the Constitution and can either open the doors or close the doors on a society. That means 535 men and women who put their shoes on every morning the way you and I do. That means 535 vulnerable people if the voters give a cutting edge. So I think the next stage of the Occupy movement should be to zero in on each one of those 535 members, starting with their district offices. You'll see Congress is under the control of corporations for the most part, but they're easily frightened by the public when it's aroused. And you could see that after the Watergate, remember the firing of the Attorney General by Nixon. 40,000 telegrams came into one senator's office in Tennessee, conservative senator, just in 3 days. Those are the days they had telegrams. So the strategy is to focus on Congress. The other point that's key is the moral authority of law students bleeds on the moral authority of the faculty. You get more and more people from the law schools standing up. You are the sentinels, aren't you? You're the first responders for the rule of law. It'll begin rolling forward into other areas and other professions. There are a lot of retired military and intelligence and diplomatic people who are sick to their stomach as to what they're seeing in the last 10 years. It's too bad Tony Schaefer was not here. He saw the massacres. He was there when he said to the fighter planes, "Don't hit that building, it's a madrasa." And the missile hit the building and slaughtered everybody in it, the school. And so once the groundswell builds up, you'll see a lot of establishment figures who are retired and free to talk, and whose patriotism was never going to be impeached by these draft-dodging neocons in Washington. They will begin swelling. This can all happen very rapidly, and of course that'll get more media.
I don't think my mic works, so I'm just going to talk loud. You said 1% of the country can change, the trajectory of politics as long as it agrees with public sentiment. Well, today there was a report published showing that a poll of Americans showed that 80% of Americans support the killing of al-Awlaki and support our drone war, including 55% of self-identified liberals. So my question to you guys is, cheer me up. I mean, basically, what are we to do with that?
You can't get discouraged by those numbers. No great movement in the history of civilization ever would have begun if the first person who said slavery was evil said, but it's not going to be abolished tomorrow. Because the struggle for justice is its own reward. Whether it happens in your lifetime or not doesn't matter. The struggle for women's franchise was 1848, Seneca Falls. Susan B. Anthony was dead. Still didn't have the 19th Amendment. So of course it's discouraging. That's why we are where we are. At a constitutional crisis.
It's not even that discouraging, because one of the great elements of due process is called cross-examination. And there was never any argument publicly reaching all these people polled as to why they should have another opinion. So obviously, if a prosecutor comes into a courtroom and with all the evidence, there's no counter evidence, and there's no appeal to the rule of law and due process, they would come out that way. Take a look at the other polls where people do have some knowledge and experience. 82% of the American people think the country's going in the wrong direction. 75% of the American people think corporations have too much control over their lives. 62% of the American people believe the two major parties are failing them. So you see, that comes from a background of a little knowledge and experience in the marketplace and so on.
And if they would have followed that question would you be in favor of that if in the next week they vaporized his 16-year-old son? Then I think the numbers would be twisted because they didn't think about what the implications are. Yeah. You wanted to vaporize a 16-year-old as innocent as the white snow.
Back there?
Oh, yes, I admire both of your talks. It's great. I'd like to see that duplicated around the country by many people. And I was a political associate, a friend of one of your former running mates, Peter Kamel, you for a few decades.
Yes.
And now what I'd like to know is this: why not look at the whole class structure? This is a system of capitalism, a government of the rich, by the rich, and for the rich. There's two classes, working class and the ruling class. Since 1960, I've been a socialist. I'm for the working class, having a working class government and taking over the capitalist government, which is their government, not our government. Their democracy, we need workers' democracy.
Well, you see my references in my prior remarks alluded to a lot of that. It's all a seamless web, isn't it? It all connects together. Concentration of power radiates in all directions. The abuses that attend it radiate. The more unaccountable they are, the more devastating the consequences. And so we're seeing declining livelihoods for 80% of the American people in real terms since 1973, unemployment and poverty and child poverty and so forth. So anybody who says we don't have class warfare from the top down is not...
No, in fact, James Madison in Federalist 10 describes the most prominent source of factions as unequal distributions of property, so it's not a novel idea. Let's take the last question from this young lady here.
I'd just like to bring up the imminency of the situation now being a war threat with the Syria-Iran situation, the push for, the sanctions on Iran, the recent UN resolution, which Susan Rice said that China and Russia had blood on their hands because they didn't want to overthrow Assad. And you guys have been talking about, the crimes of Bush and Obama, and that's true, they're there, and he should be impeached right now. But it's also a matter of avoiding thermonuclear war. So I just wanted to bring that issue up.
Well, I don't think that's true, that it's a matter that we have to invade Iran to avoid a thermonuclear war. The neocons say, for the first time in the history of the world, we have a regime that craves self-destruction. They want to die immediately to get to 77 virgins in heaven. Does that make any sense? The Soviets flinched with the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Iranians, even the mullahs, they negotiated the release of the hostages. When we shot down a civilian passenger, killed almost 300 civilians, they negotiated reparations. They ended the Iraq-Iran war. They didn't insist on committing suicide, in which they could do very conveniently by jumping into the Tigris or Euphrates and drowning, if that was what their craving was. No, we don't applaud nuclear proliferation, but we are the only country that's used nuclear weapons. We have vastly more than anyone else, and you could imagine why. Iran might say, well, you can have all these thousands of nuclear weapons, and Russia can, and Israel can, and Pakistan and India, and somehow international law says we're the only ones that can't even have a capability? That's even-handed justice? It doesn't look a little bit peculiar? We invaded we overthrew their government in 1953 with Mossadegh. But to go back to the point, this idea that nuclear deterrence doesn't work is ridiculous. It's worked flawlessly ever since World War II. We're the only ones that used it when there wasn't any other nuclear power in the world. And so don't buy this idea that unless we invade Iran, we'll all be in a nuclear winter. That's what the neocons continue to focus on in order to get us to give up our liberties.
Just one more.
I'm going to have to go.
Yeah, just one.
Well,
quick.
Bruce, I think the question was really that the invasion of Iraq risks provoking nuclear. The invasion of Iran risks provoking nuclear.
Oh, if we did that, yeah, that would, rather than the other way around.
All right, so I would like to thank both Ralph and Bruce and you all for coming.
Okay, we need to go. I got to get to the.
You want to come and get copies of this?
Yeah.
Here they are.
Get to this.